Overnight, President Trump touting an economic win, a strong jobs report that showed extensive hiring.
These are the strongest job numbers of the entire administration so far, and that's during this conflict on top of it. So it's great.
The labor market adding 172,000 jobs in May, according to new government data, more than double what economists expected. The unemployment rate holding steady at 4.3%. The president highlighting those numbers to voters in Wisconsin just months before the midterms, where the economy is likely to be a top issue.
Your fertilizer's down, your energy's down, your oil, your gas is all coming way down. And frankly, I thought it would go much higher than it did.
But broadly, Americans say they're overwhelmingly down on Trump.
By the way, Platner's doing better with women in Maine than Susan Collins is. Just wanted to point that out real quick. I believe Platner has a 54%. So yeah, David Frum is just a fucking delusional warmonger. And he's just mad that Graham Platner is a reliable anti-Israel voice in the Senate if he wins. That's it. And these guys don't want that. That's it. Because the Senate is different than the House. You can have like 10 anti-Israel voices in the House. That is still a smaller percentage than having 4 anti-Israel voices or 5 anti-Israel voices in the Senate. Okay? That's what these guys fear.
Trump's economy, according to a poll, with 75% of adults saying the economy is poor or not so good. Just 30% approving of the president's handling. It comes as Americans are facing surging inflation, rising at the fastest pace in 3 years to 3.8%. And their paychecks just aren't keeping up, rising slower at 3.4% in the past year. And heading into the summer, Americans also facing about a 40% price increase at the pump due to the war in Iran.
I have to be very careful and very cautious on how and where I go throughout my day to make sure I'm not overusing my gas.
The average gallon of gas now $4.22, according to AAA, an increase of $1.26 per gallon since the war began.
And the stock market closing lower this week on news of that report, sparking concerns it could cause the Federal Reserve to hike interest rates. The Nasdaq dropping 4% for its worst day since last April. Rhiannon.
All right, Olivia, thank you for that. More controversy surrounding Maine's Democratic Senate candidate Graham Platner. The first-time candidate returned to the campaign trail yesterday after new allegations of, quote, toxic and unsettling behavior toward women. Hundreds of supporters greeted him at an event in Bar Harbor, showing their continued support. Our Caitlin Huey-Burns has more from Capitol Hill.
Just 3 days ahead of the Senate primary, many Maine residents say they're sticking with Democratic candidate Graham Platner, despite the latest allegations against him.
He's not a perfect candidate. He's owned up to a lot of the stuff that he's done in the past.
Nobody is perfect. There is not a person out there who is absolutely perfect. Mother Teresa was not perfect.
A former girlfriend, Lindsay Fifield, told the New York Times that when she dated Platner over a decade ago, he never hit her, but regularly grabbed her by the shoulders, sometimes hard enough to leave marks. And that during one argument, he twisted her arm behind her back, shoved her into a bedroom, and held the door closed.
There are some allegations in this piece that I just want to be kind of unequivocal about are simply not true.
Platner has also insisted he didn't realize that a chest tattoo he got as a Marine and has since covered up is widely recognized as a Nazi symbol. But Fifield told the New York Times he did know.
Anything alleging physicality, anything alleging that I knew what my tattoo was, these are the statements of someone who's politically motivated.
Fifield has worked for Republican campaigns but denied any connection to Republican Maine Senator Susan Collins.
By the way, the K-File report also came from the same woman. So clearly she privately revealed this information to K-File anonymously. And then, because it came out, Andrew came out and said that it was from Lindsay Fifield, okay? The same Republican operative. Because if you recall, there was another article that was written a while ago, like one of Platner's old friends said that he knew what the tattoo was. It was the same woman. It was the same woman that is advancing this. And what's interesting is there's not a single other friend or former friend or enemy that has come out and been like, yeah, he actually knew the tattoo. Isn't that crazy? Like, I find it unbelievable that he did not know. I find it personally unbelievable that he didn't know that it was a fucking totem cough. But then I look at the fact that he literally had it visible all the time. Like, people were talking about his Kick profile where he's like hand covering the totem cough tattoo, but he literally had on his Instagram photos of himself shirtless where you can openly see the tattoo. If he fucking knew that it was a Nazi tattoo, I doubt that he would show it. Based on his Reddit history, I think he knew. I don't know. I personally find that unbelievable. Okay? I personally find that unbelievable that he did not know. But he also was literally shirtless around his Jewish immediate family members. Like, that's one of the photo that they use all the time of him like fucking drunk and shirtless dancing around. That's from his family. He's literally surrounded by his Jewish in-laws. He knew. How did they not tell him? I don't think they knew either. Sam Cedar apparently didn't know. If I saw it, I would be like, that's a totem cough. What the fuck are you doing? Zateo followed up on this specifically and got Proshko on the record for a second time, corroborating Platner's account and categorically rejecting Fifield's story about the tattoo. Another member of his unit who got the tattoo with him was interviewed by Washington Post last fall. Did the New York Times even bother to ask him whether Fifield's claim that they saw a parallel between their unit and SS was accurate? Because it sure doesn't mesh with what he said then. Phil Proshko, a fellow Marine machine gunner with Platner at the time, whom the campaign put the Post in touch with, also said he did not think the tattoo had any extremist connotations. Platner, and another friend were intoxicated when they picked out the skull and crossbones tattoo at a random parlor they walked into, he said. They didn't look up the image on the internet and then picked it up because it looked different from other skulls, he said. The tattoo was meant to commemorate their third deployment after many in their unit had died or had been injured in previous years. We weren't going to get unicorns. I know that, Proshko said. The Times, Zateo followed up with Proshko again, the other guy in his unit that has the same tattoo, or maybe had the same tattoo. I don't know if he still does. The Times wrote that Fifield further claimed that Platner said he told her that he and other members of his unit selected the tattoo because they were like a death unit. They were killers and saw a parallel between their unit and the Nazi Schutzstaffel or SS unit that used the skull and crossbones image, she told the paper. They literally deliberately selected it because it was relevant to their military unit. Phil Proshko, who served with Platner in the Marines, dismissed his claim in a brief interview with Zateo on Friday. No, we did not purposely get a hateful fucking shit because we're racist people, he said. We got matching tattoos because we were in our 20s drunk in Croatia, and that's it. That's all fucking happened. I still find it unbelievable, to be fair. Genuinely. But I know the depth of knowledge that I have on Nazi symbolism is clearly not the same as the average American. And even in my community, right? So that's why it's like I find it unbelievable because, again, we looked up the Wikipedia page. It was the third most popular Nazi symbol on the planet. Okay? The swastika being number 1, the double lightning bolts being number 3, and the 2, and totem cough being number 3. You and the brainless chatters can't accept. No, I can. I objectively am accepting the reality that 98% of the United States have no idea what a fucking totem cough is. Okay? I am saying that. I'm literally recognizing my own depth of knowledge in this that is probably causing me to find his story unbelievable. That's it. I know I'm hyper aware about this kind of stuff because I've spent a good deal of time in the last 13 years actively trying to de-radicalize people and understanding or trying to understand, like, you know, far right circles and how they operate, what their dog whistles are and the like. So yes, because I've spent a good deal of time combating the far right, combating neo-Nazis on the internet, I'm very aware of, you know, the literature that they read, the symbolism that they utilize. That's why I jokingly say I have a PhD in racism. But yeah.
Collins, who Platner would face this fall if he wins Tuesday's primary. But a second woman, a Maine Democrat, who also said she dated Platner, told the New York Times she found some of his behavior, quote, reckless.
Do you believe you deserve to represent Maine?
Platner is also facing criticism within his own party.
Some Democrats will defend that mess.
Yeah, the people that are criticizing Graham Platner in the Democratic Party, by the way, the depths that Jake Tapper will sink to is expected, okay? Is totally expected. Did you guys see Jake Tapper had a Democrat on to unendorse Graham Platner? Yeah, the motherfucking Democrat that Jake Tapper had on to unendorse Graham Platner, her claim to fame is getting fifth place in a fucking Democratic primary one time. That's it. They don't even have like a deep enough talent pool here to get quotes from. The only one that it will openly, like the highest profile person that will openly oppose Graham Platner and call for a majority Republican Senate is this fucking dumb ogre.
I will not.
Yet other high-profile senators like Bernie Sanders and Chuck Schumer are standing by Platner. And as for his likely general election opponent, Susan Collins, she said that these newest allegations are troubling and that Platner has a lot of questions to answer. For CBS Saturday Morning, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Washington.
Overnight, the Democratic candidate in one of the year's most closely watched Senate races defending his candidacy against a firestorm of controversy. Graham Platner, an oyster farmer and former Marine, is running to unseat Maine Republican Susan Collins.
When hurtful things I said on the internet a decade ago came out into the public, as I shared my personal journey through PTSD and darkness, of recovery and accountability and growth, Maine had my back. Now, as every single piece of that past and journey gets dug up, litigated, and weaponized, you have my back.
The allegations against Platner have piled on fast. First, a series of sexist Reddit posts.
Look, this is classic, okay? This is a classic media smear job, okay? I will give you the autopsy of how this works. First, they'll do a full spectrum opposition research on every single thing. They'll find old social media profiles, stuff like that. That's classic. That happens all the time. That happens for all candidates, by the way. So Graham Platner is not unique in that sense. And they'll try to find anything and everything they can that has like meat on it, right? Has there ever been, has he ever said something that is at least like without the proper context, seemingly irredeemable, right? Has he said things in context that are irredeemable? So they'll do that, okay? And then they'll start reporting on it, okay? And then they'll report on the reporting on it, and they'll say, oh, it's piling on. Then they'll go out and try to find people on the opposition that will obviously be critical of it. There will be plenty of people in the opposition on the Republican side that will be critical of it. And then they'll go to the Democrats and they'll try to find a high-profile Democrat that will oppose Graham Platner or oppose the figure that we're talking about. Not just Graham Platner. I'm using this as a jump-off point to explain to you how the media operates, how they manufacture outrage. Okay? So then the hits keep coming. If they find a specific angle in the opposition research, they'll try to needle on that angle to the best of their ability. If the fishing expedition comes back with anything, which there was plenty for Graham Platner, they'll start hitting every angle they possibly can, one by one. Okay? For him, it's the fact that as a veteran, he came back, he had PTSD, he had alcohol issues, and they found enough in his like mountains of Reddit posts. They found like a couple choice lines that they could use to say he's like a sexist, he's anti-women, he's misogynistic. Once the opposition sets in and you can like angle Graham Platner as like a woman hater, and they can hit him on that angle over and over again, they go to work. They look through, they scour through all of the relationships that he has had. Okay? They'll go and investigate all of his relationships. They'll go out to the ex-girlfriends and ask them, like, did you have a bad experience? All this stuff. And we're at that stage in the New York Times with the New York Times piece that came out, right? And there wasn't really a lot there to really throw an anchor around his neck to basically strangle him with, right? So when that doesn't happen, when there isn't enough there, the story then becomes there's a lot of scandal around this guy. Okay? There's a lot of scandal around this person. So the story itself becomes, if you can't actually jam him up with something serious, then the story itself becomes the fact that there is a lot of stories about this guy. And that's where we're at currently. They could not actually find high profile enough Democrats to oppose him. So they went deep into the bench and found like some random fucking Democratic operatives that'll be like, yeah, although I work with a bunch of different lobbyist groups that hate this fucking guy's guts, I'm not going to reveal that in this conversation. I'm going to tell you I'm a lifelong Democrat voter and I oppose Graham Platner. Right? And then for Jake Tapper, he'll go to any lengths, obviously, and then the story itself becomes there's a lot of stories about Graham Platner. This guy is too scandal ridden.
Now deleted,
or
then
scandal
reports
riddled.
he exchanged sexual text messages with at least 6 women shortly after he was married in 2023. Platner's wife, Amy, standing by him.
I want my marriage, and I want to be married to Graham.
The New York Times reporting several of Platner's ex-girlfriends describe, quote, unsettling behavior. One reportedly claiming Platner regularly grabbed her.
What do you think the reason is for the Dems to not say anything to disavow internal fracturing? No. Because at the end of the day, the reason why Chuck Schumer has to fucking sit there and eat dick as he turns around and says, yeah, we're going to defeat Susan Platner, is because he's the leader of the Democratic Party in the Senate. No matter how much he loves Israel, he literally can't be like, yeah, I actually want a Republican majority. Did I say Susan Platner again? Fuck. Susan Collins.
By the shoulders, sometimes hard enough to leave marks, and on one occasion yanked her out of a cab by her wrist. She says during one argument, Platner twisted her arm behind her back, shoved her into a bedroom, and held the door closed from the other side so she couldn't get out.
Yeah, this is all from the Republican operative.
Platner fiercely denies any violence.
Again, the Republican operative that worked to actively get Brett Kavanaugh appointed, okay? That is an important fact. That is an important fact. They say this is coming, like the media right now is doing this as though like all of his former ex-girlfriends have had similar stories. That's not the case. The only person that's come out on the record to say this is a literal Republican operative that started the Women for Kavanaugh group. The Women for Kavanaugh group. You don't think that's relevant? You don't think that calls into question her perspective on sexual assault, domestic violence, and the like?
Democrats here in Maine divided.
I feel like his political mission is sincere, and that's what I'm voting for.
I will never vote for Graham Platner.
So Graham Platner is not the Democratic nominee yet. The primaries are on Tuesday, and Maine's Governor Janet Mills is still on the ballot. Now, she had suspended her campaign back in April, but as this scandal swirls around Platner, she wants to make sure that Democrats here know they can still vote for her if they want to, Gio.
Lots of twists and turns in all of this. Selena Wang, thank you so much.